Hey there guys, and welcome to this week's episode of Matthew Presents, where I will be continuing my series of reviewing the episodes from the Regenerations box set, and this week it's time for me to review the War Games. So sit back guys. So then guys, it's time for me to review the second story in my Regenerations box set, which is the War Games. Last week I reviewed the 10th Planet. If you have not checked that out already, I'll put a link to that video on the screen right now. But right now I'm going to be reviewing the 10-part extravaganza, which was the War Games. And honestly guys, the War Games was just... it was probably the only classic story so far to leave me speechless. You know, I got told by everyone, don't watch all 10 parts at once, it will exhaust you, you won't be able to manage it. But I thought, okay, fair enough, I'll watch 6 parts this day and I'll watch 4 parts the next day. And I thought that's fair enough, but when it came to watching this story, once you're in it, and once you're watching it, and once you're enthralled by it, you can't take your eyes off it. And last night I stayed up till about 1 in the morning, I watched all 10 parts, I was not exhausted, in fact I would have settled for more, it was that good. But yeah, I'll go through the synopsis in a moment. I've got a few facts about the War Games. Obviously, it was 10 parts long. It was transmitted between the 19th of April and the 21st of June 1969. It was written by Terrence Dicks and Malcolm Hulke. And a fun fact is that the War Games was quickly written to replace 2 other stories. The end of the 6th serial back in 1969 was meant to have ended with 2 other stories. But I'm not sure if they were lost, or they were sacked, or they weren't good enough, or whatever. But the War Games was basically a replacement. That's why it was so long, because it had to make up for 2 stories. And my God, what a replacement it was! You know, there was so much going on, and you could tell just by watching it that even though it had the same story throughout, different mini stories were going on in each episode, and. A lot of people would assume that a 10-part story would be exhausting to watch, but there was always something going on, something new happening, and the story progressed very, very nicely, and it progressed, and the pace was perfect as well. It wasn't too slow, it wasn't too fast, everything just flowed. The fluidity was brilliant in this story, and there was so much going on. So I'm going to read you the synopsis. So the War Games. On an alien planet, the Doctor uncovers a diabolical plot to conquer the galaxy, with brainwashed soldiers abducted from Earth, forced to fight in simulated environments, reflecting the periods in history whence they were taken. The aliens, which were in charge, were calling themselves the aliens, their aim is to produce a super army from the survivors. To this end, they have been aided by a renegade from the Doctor's own race of the Time Lords, calling himself the War Chief. Okay, yes, there's a lot going on in that synopsis. But basically, the Doctor, Zoe, and Jamie, they land in World War I. Well, they think it's World War I. In fact, it isn't. It's a simulated world made up of different time zones. Basically, in each different time zone, there's a different war going on. So they landed in what they thought was World War I. If they were to travel a few miles north, they'd go through this time zone, and they would end up in, I don't know, the Roman times. If they headed east, they'd end up in the American Civil War. If they headed south, they'd end up in the Spanish Armada. I don't know. But basically, yeah, there was different time zones across this simulated world. And the aliens, as they were calling themselves, they created this simulated world and used real soldiers and brainwashed them into thinking that they were real soldiers when in fact they were processed humans. And they tricked them into thinking that they were real humans fighting real wars when they actually weren't, because they were using them soldiers to fight a race called the Resistance. And helping them with Time Lord technology was the War Chief, who was the first Time Lord we'd ever seen other than the Doctor. So many different things to talk about, and honestly, I cannot describe this this episode properly, the only way you can understand everything is if you go and watch it, and that's why I highly recommend it. But yeah, straight away this story threw questions at me, because in each war, you know, each regiment had a major, and the major was part of the aliens, and they had these special glasses which made the humans believe everything that they heard, everything that the aliens told them, because obviously these humans are processed. You know, they didn't realise that they were fighting in a simulated world. Everything they saw they thought were real, but every time that they seen something suspicious, they'd question the majors, and the major would just put his glasses on, stare at them, and he'd make the humans believe whatever he told them. And that was really mysterious, and it really made me think, what the hell is going on here? How can this happen in World War I? How can this happen in Roman times and everything like that? And it all pieced together so very well. The writing and how clever this was written is just amazing. But yeah, one thing I want to talk about is the War Chief. Well, like I said earlier, he was the first Time Lord that we'd ever came into contact with. At first we didn't realise he was a Time Lord, but he came across straight away. His first impression, he was very authoritative. You know, whoever stood in his way, he'd try and make himself the smartest in the room. You know, he'd speak down to everyone. And the really interesting thing about the War Chief is that he had the same motive and the same common enemy as the Doctor. When him and the Doctor met later on in the story, in I think it was episode 9, they had one hell of a confrontation. My God, it was probably one of my favourite scenes in the story. And this was where we found out that the Doctor had run away from the Time Lords, that he'd stole a TARDIS, and that scene was just intense. You know, him and the War Chief were basically, they were kind of agreeing but disagreeing because they both didn't like their people. They were both running away, except the War Chief's motives were basically he wanted to use the soldiers that were fighting the Resistance. He wanted to use them to help fight other things across the galaxy. Basically, he was using them to help the Time Lords fight enemies across the galaxy. So despite him and the Doctor having the same common enemy, they had kind of indifferent motives, and that's where they clashed. And the War Chief was an amazing character. And like, I think someone commented on our video a couple of weeks ago when me and James discussed which Time Lord should return. Someone mentioned the War Chief, and now that I've seen him in an actual episode, I could not agree more. Another character that we came into contact with was another Time Lord called the Warlord. He was in charge of this situation. He was basically the stereotypical Time Lord. You know, he didn't look it. It was a bit underwhelming. He didn't have any big collars or any big gowns. He wasn't colourful. He was just, well, an old gadget with short hair and glasses, really. But yeah, he was very authoritative, very stern. And if you went against his word, you'd be in big trouble. And one thing this story did so very well was it foreshadowed the Time Lords, because, like I said, you know, throughout this story, different layers were getting unmasked from the story, and you were finding out more and more and more, and it just became so intriguing. Because at first, the first thing that you get told is basically the Majors, every time they came into contact, every time that they needed to speak to the aliens, who they were obviously in league with, they had to travel to the aliens in a box, and this box happened to be bigger on the inside. And obviously, as a modern viewer, I knew exactly what the machine was. As soon as these machines, these spaceships which were bigger on the inside landed, I knew they were TARDISes because they made the same noise as the TARDIS. But back then, in 1969, I can imagine all the viewers must have been like, wait a minute, how can there be another ship bigger on the inside that makes the same noise as the TARDIS? Is the Doctor got another brother? Is there other people like the Doctor? It must have been so shocking for them. And these TARDIS-like spaceships that kept appearing, it just foreshadowed that there was something up and that the Doctor was hiding something. And the Doctor was he was very shameful, because I remember Zoe questioned the Doctor. She said, "How can there be a spaceship that looks like the TARDIS, that is bigger on the inside and makes the same noise as the TARDIS?" And the Doctor danced around the subject. Every time the Time Lords were mentioned, he'd dance around the subject. And it was the first time that the Doctor, I'd ever seen him scared, really. You know, he'd fought Cybermen, Daleks, anything that came in his way, you know, he'd face full on. But as soon as the Time Lords were mentioned, he was scared, and he danced around the subject like he was in denial that they were ever there. And eventually, when he found out that the Time Lords were coming for him because they he mentioned that the Time Lords, they like to observe the universe and not interfere, and they were coming after the Doctor and the Warlord because they'd interfered in time too much and they'd got in the way. And the Doctor's desperation to run away from the Time Lords was shocking. I mean, I knew as a modern viewer that the Doctor doesn't like his people, that he's been running away from them. But there's one scene in this story where the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe are running to the TARDIS in slow motion, and the world is shaking, the Time Lords are coming after the Doctor. It's so intense and so suspenseful and so suspensive when they're chasing him, and he's trying his hardest, he's crawling his way to the TARDIS because you can see genuine fear of the Doctor. He's scared of his own people, and it made you really question the Doctor as a person. You think, okay, I've knew this guy on my television screens as a hero. Is he hiding something? Why is he so scared of his people? Why are they so power hungry? Why are they so corrupted? And we find that out because when the Time Lords are introduced, they're very smart, they're very sophisticated, and they come across like they're by the book, you know, they're all for the rules. But at times in this story, if you got on the bad side or disagreed with the Time Lords, they would take vindictive actions and they would do unspeakable things to people. And this story, if it did one thing, it added more depth to the Doctor's character, and it made you second guess and think twice about this guy that we are watching travel around time and space every week, because we were taking him for granted up until this point. You know, we were just assuming that he was this good hero who'd do no wrong. But in this story, the War Games, it was monumental in the fact that it just gave the Doctor's character a new layer and showed us a side of him that we'd never seen before, and a side that would change the way we looked on his character forever. And obviously, eventually, as you all know, the Doctor, he tried to run away. You know, even when they'd put him on trial, he tried to escape because he was that scared of the Time Lords. They kept catching him, and eventually it led to them changing his face. You've all seen the regeneration scene by now. And like I said with the 10th Planet, I've seen all the regenerations, but I've never seen how they've all built up. And to see how the one in the War Games built up, I always felt a bit disappointed that he was just put on trial and they just changed his face. It seemed a bit too quick and a bit easy, but once you've watched the story, it makes perfect sense. And this regeneration will probably rise higher in my ranking of regenerations because of its build-up. They put the Doctor on trial. You've all seen the regeneration scene, I'm hoping anyway. The Doctor said a nice goodbye to Jamie and Zoe, and the regeneration for me was perfect for Patrick Troughton's Doctor. Although we didn't see the transformation, you know, he'd finally been caught by his own people, and you could tell why he was so desperate to escape. This story for me was revolutionary, monumental, and it just left me speechless. Even though I was, as a modern viewer, I knew everything about the Time Lords, I knew everything about the Doctor and the Time Lords relationship, I was still shell-shocked by what I witnessed in this episode. It was fantastic. So I could go on and on and on, and I'm trying not to, so I'm going to conclude while I'm at it. So here's my conclusion on the War Games. The War Games was an outstanding 10-part extravaganza, written perfectly, which had everything a Doctor Who story needed. A plot which entranced me throughout all 10 parts, which kept me on the edge of my seat at all times. Fantastic performances from all around and all involved, especially from Patrick Troughton. A great villain, great direction, but most importantly, this story was revolutionary, introducing the Time Lords, giving the Doctor's character more depth, and showing him in a different perspective. It highlighted the Doctor's motives for disliking his people and why he ran away. His regeneration was epic and dramatic, showing how corrupt and powerful the Time Lords really are. This story was flawless, incredibly enjoyable, and without a doubt, it takes its place as my favourite classic story so far. It gave Patrick Troughton the best possible send-off, which was the least this amazing Doctor deserved. I have full pleasure in giving this monumental story a 10 out of 10. This was one of the most looked forward episodes that I wanted to see on the Regenerations box set, but it's definitely took its place as my favourite classic story so far. It was so intense, so enjoyable, there was always something going on, it progressed so well, it was revolutionary, monumental. Oh my god, I could describe this episode in so many words. If you can, honestly, if you are going out looking for classic episodes, this is the first one that you need to watch, because it changed Doctor Who forever, it changed the Doctor forever, it introduced the Time Lords, honestly, go out and get the War Games. I'm not sure how much it is online. It might be a bit more considering it's a 10-part story, but it is just a riveting watch, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this to every single Doctor Who classic or modern fan out there, because even if you're not a fan of the classic series, this episode changed Doctor Who forever, and it shaped and helped morph the Doctor Who that we see today with the Doctor and the Time Lords. We're starting to see the Doctor and the Time Lords a little bit more now in the modern series, but it all kicked off and it all started with the War Games. A 10 out of 10. Very rare I give an episode 10 out of 10, but this is definitely worth it. So I guess it's time for me to run through a couple of comments from last week's episode, which was my review of the 10th Planet.
So my first comment is from TJ Productions, who says, "Great review, thank you my friend," and he asked, "Are you going to do all the regeneration stories ranked from worst to best?" Yes, I am going to be doing that after I've reviewed all 10 stories on the Regenerations box set and Night of the Doctor. I'm going to put them all into a ranking. I was thinking if I should carry on, because obviously this runs up to the end of time, parts 1 and 2, and I thought, well, considering we've already reviewed the movie and End of Time, and James has reviewed Logopolis, should I bother? Yes, I'm going to bother reviewing all the episodes on this box set and Night of the Doctor, but I'm not going to review the Day of the Doctor because John Hurt's regeneration was not even that significant in the story, and we did a 51-minute review on it, and the Time of the Doctor we've mentioned God knows how many times. So after I finished reviewing all 10 of them and the Night of the Doctor, I will be putting them into a countdown. My second comment is from Doctor Who Freak HD, who said, "Great review dude, thank you very much. I'm not particularly fussed about this box set because I have most of the DVDs already, even though I think the pages on each Doctor would be an interesting read. Liked, looked forward to the War Games, as it is the departure of my favourite Doctor." Well, that's the thing, when I was discussing this this box set, if you've already got all the stories separately, then there's no point getting it. The reason why I got this box set myself is because it had most episodes I'd not seen before. I don't like bothering to buy things that I've already seen before because I can just go see them whenever I want. So, you know, most DVDs I'm going to buy are classics, and I got this because it has a lot of stories that I've heard of and a lot of stories that I know are brilliant, like the Caves of Rodrozani. I cannot wait to watch. So if you've got them already on DVD, I wouldn't bother getting it, but like you said, the read, it's definitely worth it. So as a collector's item, it's worth saying I've got one of these, as there's only 10,000, but that's completely your own opinion.
I am the danger.
So my third and final comment is from Stuart C, and he did say, "Great review of a great story, thank you once again. I agree about the Cybermen now looking too much like super robots. They have lost that essence of humanity that they had back then. I quite like the voices and was pleased that they were recreated for spare parts audio. William Hartnell was very ill during the filming for this, hence why he isn't in it so much, as you say. It's a pity, as it was his last full story, but one of my favourite stories this, and I look forward to the War Games review, another one of my favourites." Well, about the Cybermen, I definitely agree with them looking more human. I think they were more creepy when they were more human, with human hands and everything. And the modern Cybermen, well, before Nightmare and Silver anyway, they were just too robotic. You know, they just look like human tin cans, but I definitely prefer the new design. They look slightly more human, and they don't fucking make loud noises when they walk. But the voices, I cannot, you know, James will agree with me, the voices for the Cybermen and the 10th Planet were, oh my god, they were awful. But yeah, it was a shame William Hartnell couldn't do much filming. It was his final episode. He was very ill, so I guess they couldn't help it. But I would just love to have seen more of the first Doctor in the 10th Planet. So then guys, thank you for watching this week's episode of Matthew Presents. Next week I will be continuing my reviews with Planet of the Spiders, except next Friday it is my birthday and it's Valentine's Day. Go on, laugh your hearts out. So I will not be uploading my video on the Friday, I will be uploading it a day earlier. So next week's review of Planet of the Spiders will be on the Thursday. So don't forget to drop a like on this video, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and if you want to be updated on the channel, go to our website. A link is at the bottom of your screen now. Comment below your opinions on the War Games and I will answer them next week. So then guys, I'll see you this Sunday.